Hello, my name is Takoda. I'm the project supervisor for Angel's Nook. When it comes to applying Heirloom Traditions paint, traditional painters say just brush it on or roll it on. Others say just spray it on. Then there are those who trust the company tutorials and either use brush and roll, or the true applicator stippling, or what I call the sponge fluffers. Mum is going to show you the final finish for each application.
I have 5 doors of this size that I've gotten from Habitat for Humanity. For the most part, they are in decent enough shape to go ahead and paint after deglossing. But 3 of the doors need some extra prep. And what I found with how dirty these doors were, I started with the new whites, and 2 of the doors that weren't really bad, the white did a good job on them. But the doors that were really dirty and had sticky and gooey things onto them, it was much faster and more efficient to just dip my green scrubby into deglosser, work it on there, and it came right off. As I was working on these doors and checking them, along this edge right here, there's a roughness where it's been hit with something and scraped. So technically you could paint over it, but I know that's going to show. So I've got 220 grit here. It's catching because of that roughness. And I have a small piece so I can roll it into the valley here. And there's a spot right here. Also needed sanding. But that's all that needed there. Now on this edge, there's some paint. And if it were smooth, I wouldn't worry about it, but it's not. It's rough. So I'm going to take the same thing. And until I feel it's smooth, I'm going to sand it. And up here, where this chunk of paint is. Because if I don't, all that ridginess of it is going to show on my finished door. Sand with the grain, not against it. Because that will make marks, even though you're not staining it, that will make marks that you'll see in your finish. That didn't take but a couple of minutes. I wasn't sanding the whole door down. I was just doing minor work with it. And to remember where the spot was on this one. Oh, up here at the top was rough. That's smoothed down now. And on the inside of the door, when they sprayed the finish on this, they did runs. You could leave it, but I don't like the fact that when I paint the inside of my door, that's going to look like I left runs. So if I take the time to knock that down, plastic isn't gouging the door, but it's grabbing off the biggest parts of that when I loosened it up with the sandpaper. The plastic putty knife will damage it. Now that won't be noticeable when I paint. There's a spot down here too. Same thing, they were sloppy how they put the finish on. So if you find this with places where there's runs of old paint, you want to get rid of it because it's going to show when you paint over it. And what doesn't show badly with this stain will show when you paint. This last door had some of that same thing on the inside. Another thing is, this was only drilled on the back as a pilot for if somebody wanted to put knobs on. If you're changing the hardware on your cabinets, you're going to need to sand where you take the hardware off, because there's going to be possibly an indentation or marks or finish that came up against it that's going to show when you put new hardware on. This had some rough on the edges. It was basically running my hand over it to feel those. It's not major, and right here, this has got some, where this got hit with something. And for me, it's worth it to clean that up. Now, the top edge of this door has a gouge out of it. Something actually broke a piece out. And then there is rough here as well, up here on this end. This was probably a door that had water close to it. It's what it feels like. But what I'm going to use to fix this is plastic wood by DAP. You can get this in cans, but I like this because it squeezes out and I can control it. I like the natural color. It comes in all kinds of colors. So if you're doing white, you can get really dark. You can get it really close to the finish that you have to make it easier to fill over. All right, better. And with this acting the way it is, I may have to come back in a little while and add another coat into it. Usually a little thicker than this. Definitely going to need a second coat, but I'm just smoothing what I can off with my fingers, let it dry. It's much better to do multiple coats than to try to fill it with one fill. We'll leave this sitting upside down so it goes the way it does, and we'll let this dry. Come back and do a second coat. We'll seal it with shellac, and then this will be, all the doors will be ready to start painting, trying different techniques to see what they look like as they dry. Thank you. The wood putty has dried completely, but we thought this was a good time to let you see some of the things that we do to make sanding a lot easier, especially when you're trying to match up the shape of a form on like a cabinet door, or maybe a piece of trim on a dresser that you're repairing or a drawer. These sponge sanding blocks that you can get from the big box stores are really great for a lot of things, especially a flat surface like the front of a door. But where you're trying to get a really straight line, it's easier to use something that is wood, that the sandpaper has been wrapped around, or in this case, it's a piece of plastic trim that we have that's really hard, but it's going to hold its shape well. This will let you see that this is a piece of PVC pipe. They come in all different sizes, and you can get small pieces from the big box store. You don't have to get a great big long piece. But when you find the piece that fits, if you've got a curve channel on a piece, this will fit down in there and uniformly sand so that you're not creating dips or unevenness. This has been covered in carpenter tape. It's used to hold down carpet into place. There's a lot of uses for it, but it's a really handy thing to have around. And this allows you to stick this down and it will stay stuck in place, but you can easily peel a worn piece of sandpaper off and replace it. So this has an angle under here. So I'm going to use this smaller piece so that I can stay flat against that. Until I get that lined up. Then I'm going to use this same piece to go along the top here. And you'll see that the excess is starting to come off, so that I'm only left with where I actually need the fill to be, which is what lets it smooth out onto this. Feeling with your fingers gives you a better idea for whether or not you actually have it smooth. It was a little bit up against this edge here, so I'm pushing this edge into there to get that out, and some came up onto the top of this, which I don't want there. You can feel a spot right there. I have two choices. This is really, really smooth for the front of the cabinet. Underneath here, depending on whether this is the top or the bottom of the door. If it's the bottom of the door, I would not worry about this tiny little divot here of refilling it. But if it's the top of the door, I would definitely refill it and sand again. But that's going to be a personal choice. But I'm going to go ahead and refill this because I don't like it being like that. I've got it a little bit higher, not by much, and that'll only take a couple of swipes of the sandpaper to get that completely level. Then it'll be ready to put a little bit of shellac on and start painting. But that's not a long process to fix something so that it no longer has a chunk out of it. The second coat of wood putty has dried on this, and so I'm going to do a light sanding here to get it smooth. That's perfectly even with everything now. It didn't take but a couple of swipes. I'm going to use a small brush to apply shellac. Easier cleanup. I really don't need a big brush. Get this. There's a little bit of raw wood here where I have sanded, so I'm just going over that with the shellac too. One of the things you need to know when you're using wood filler, you need to do those repairs prior to deglossing, or degloss, do the repair, and know that the shellac finish is ready to paint over, because the deglosser will get the wood putty wet and start to remove some of it. Once the wood putty is sealed, it is very durable and stable, but if it gets wet, it will come out. So that's something you need to remember with it. While this is drying, which will only take about 20 or 30 minutes, I'm going to go ahead and start working on other doors. But first I'm going to clean this counter up so there's no sanding dust and all in the way for getting that into my paint. Thank you. This is a brand new can of Simply Sage. I opened it up, and if you look at the top, this looks black. And you need to think about the fact that if you buy paint, I've ever bought paint from a big box store, they are going to put the pigment in, they're going to shake the daylights out of it in their mechanical shaker that really does move the paint, and it's in there for 5 to 8 minutes, depending on the pigments that are put in there and the specific kind of paint that they've added pigment to. So if you open this up and you look at it and go, it's just water, they sent me bad paint. No, they didn't send you bad paint. It needs stirred. And if I pull down in here, you can start to see this is super thick that's here, and closer to the color it actually is. But you need to move that paint from the bottom up, and it's going to take 4 to 5 minutes of continuous stirring to get this completely mixed. I'm not going to keep you on camera through that whole process, but you can see I'm scraping the bottom, I'm pulling up from the bottom, and it's starting to look like Simply Sage, but it's nowhere near completely mixed yet. One of the things you can do to make this a little easier to mix up for yourself is when you get the paint, when it's shipped into you, set it on the counter upside down. That will let what has settled to the bottom start to move back toward the top. And when you open it, you're still going to see a mixture of colors. It may look more like this looks right now, but it simply means it's got to be thoroughly stirred. And as you're using the paint, if you close the paint up after a day of painting, the next day when you start painting, stir it again before you start. All paint needs that, but this paint has primer, top coat, and paint in it, so it especially needs for you to do a really good job stirring it. I'm going to turn the camera off of this, finish stirring this, and you're going to stir until you absolutely see no more of these circles coming up of different colors, which you should be able to see on here. You don't want to see that. You want to see pure color. The paint has now been stirred for about 4 minutes, and you've got a good solid color on here. For those who say, well, all you have to do is shake it, not a quart size or larger, it will not work. You're going to find sludge at the bottom, so you're going to be missing pigment. You're going to be missing part of your primer, part of your top coat. It needs to be stirred. Now the small sample jars, if you shake it for a long time, yes, you can just shake it. But even that, I stir it. One of the things you'll run into on your sample jars or even on these, if you put it away and it's half full or less than half full or so, and you have it sitting on the shelf for a number of months, you may find when you open it that it's thicker than it is right now. Yes, this is a thick paint. It's designed to be applied the way the company tutorials say, with either the sponge and stippling with the sponge, or a brush and stippling with the roller, because both are doing the same thing. The sponge and the roller are both blending out brush marks. It wasn't designed to be applied with a brush on large surfaces. Now it works great on hardware, small pieces to apply using a small art brush, or to smooth the corners where it pools in a cabinet corner. But it is exactly the thickness it is meant to be for the way it is meant to be applied. So when you apply it with other tools and in different ways, you're going to get a different result with it. But do not, when you get this out, go, oh, this is too thick. I need to add water to this and thin it. No, you're going to change its viscosity levels. You're going to change how it looks with a finish. Use it as it's intended. Or if you don't like it, use a different paint and apply it the way you grew up applying paint. But this paint is not designed that way. It's unique. As far as I know, I haven't found anything else on the market that's remotely like this, that can adhere to all the surfaces that it can and be as durable as it is. So we're going to start with, I'm going to use a door with the different application techniques. The first one we're going to do is just brush. So I'm going to put a marker on the back of this with tape that it is brush, and we'll start working on it. So that I have stability doing any application on cabinet doors, I like them off, and on red Solo cups. Don't put your cups like this. They will rock upside down. You can see, let's see if I can turn it here for you. The label that this one is, the door is just brushed. So that's what we're going to do with this one. And that's why I have paint out in the paint tray. I don't normally do that. I normally paint straight from the can with how I use Heirloom Traditions. This is a good brush. And what I do first is I always do these frame areas, the inner ones, because you can see you get down onto the center of the door when you're trying to put the paint onto those. I painted for many years with just brush in a lot of kitchens. There is no odor to this paint. You have to get right up on it, really stick your nose against it so it's safe for your pets, your birds, your babies. And the next thing I like to do is the center panel of the door. You can get rid of all those stripes that were going against the grain. And even when you're painting, paint with the grain. Same as you would doing stain. If you don't go ahead and paint the center, you're going to have lines showing the directions going across the grain. And you do not want that. Then I start doing the frame. If you've never used this paint before, you should work on the back of your doors first because there is a learning curve for this paint. And the back of your doors, if your technique is not as good because you're learning, it isn't a big deal because those are rarely seen and won't be noticeable when you open your cabinet doors. Having these on the solo cups makes it easier to get the edges. The last strokes you want to do, you want to go around and check. Didn't get the edge of this one in the first paint. You want to go around and check. You don't have runs or paint overage along these edges. That's your last check of whatever method you're doing. This one I'm going to use just a roller, and so it is labeled that it is rolled. I got brand new dense foam cabinet roller, so we'll see how this does. You wrap that for me, please. You can even use the oil. Actually, I'm going to need the brush because the roller is not going to get in here all the way. The dense foam roller will give you the smoothest rolled finish, but then it also does not contour to get into the decorative edge of this frame panel or tight up against the edge. You want to do this rolling motion where that edge is going to look different than the rest of the panel. And if you notice, I've put the tip against the frame because if it bumps up, it's not going to scrape paint off the way this metal will. See if I have to do the edge of this or if the roller can handle. Roller's going to handle the frame. Oak is an open grain wood, so your first coat of paint is not going to fill all of the grain. There are products out there to fill that grain, but man, it's a lot of work, a lot of sanding. But if you don't want to see it, that's the option that you have to go through. And in my opinion, it's not necessarily a bad thing that you can see the grain after you have fully painted, because it's saying it is a quality wood, solid wood door instead of laminate. There's a run over here. So going around it, you can see those and catch them. The other thing you want to watch for are the corners. There's no paint that is pooled in the corners of these, but that's one of the places it likes to do it. So if you have a small art brush like this handy, that'll let you clean those up when you need to. And in fact, there's one right here that I can see. I got it in just the right light, but that's all it needed, was just a very quick light wipe to get rid of that pool. Alrighty, this one's ready to dry for its first coat. This one, I'm going to be using the True Applicator by Heirloom Traditions Paint. And this is just personal preference. You're not sure which way you want to do it. Try both, because they come in the tool pack. You get the True Applicator and the tools for brush and roll. Try it both ways on the back of the door. See what works best for you. The other thing is, a lot of people paint with their doors on. I paint faster with them off because I don't have to use the art brush around all the hinges and in the tiny spaces. But it's perfectly fine and fast and easier for some people to leave the doors on, especially if you don't have an extra pair of hands to help you put those doors back on. So it's all about what works for you. I'd also suggest you try painting a door on and the frame, and then try painting the frame with a door and a door off, and see which way works better for you. Normally, I would be taking an open paint can, putting my True Applicator about half over it, tipping up, and having paint on it. But since I have paint here in the tray, I'm going to grab paint. No matter how you're applying the paint, don't try to make it go a super long way. Keep dipping back into the paint. I'm getting more of a stretch out here because I'm trying to get that frame done. But you'll see how it changes when I'm on a flat surface. And you can see bubbles forming. That's okay. It actually means I'm using enough paint here on my True Applicator. The True Applicator, it doesn't matter how you're moving the paint, you just want to get it on there. You want to work fast because this paint dries fast. probably faster than any other paint you've ever used. So you can't be going slow and being super meticulous. Kind of defeats the whole purpose because you're going to have places where it dries, and then that's going to create texture all over it. And then you want to start pouncing it. These are not hard pounces. Yes, I'm starting to create some bubbles here, but if you notice, all of those marks where you could see swipe marks are all disappearing. Different people prefer this tool over the brush and roll. I think the biggest thing with this tool is you can't be smacking it, even though you can hear some sound here. I'm patting it gently like I might pat a baby. And you have to go super, super light. Get the last of those bubbles off. Again, I'm going to go around with the hole outside, double checking. And then even though you can see what may look to you like bubbles in the surface, it's not if you look closely really bubbles. What I do see right here is a thickness of paint that I don't want there. So that I do have to touch. Then trust the process and leave it alone to dry. You can see that not all of the cracks are filled in on this. I'm not worried about that on my first coat of paint. I don't want to wind up with pools in here. I just want to get the first coat on. This is often referred to as the ugly coat because when it dries, it's not going to have fully covered. So then on the second coat, I can see where it wasn't filling well. That's where I can go back with an art brush when I start to do my second coat and apply paint into those areas so that that gets fully covered. This one I've labeled as brush and roll, which is my favorite method for this paint because I can get into all the grooves, I can get the finish smoothed out, and you can see it's not a slow process to do these. Once you get the technique down, it's easy to just rock and roll through these. And you can see I keep going back for paint, but I'm not going way up on my brush. The paint is barely down there on my brush, because I don't want paint all up in the top. That's just going to fill up my brush and give me more to have to clean up. I just need it. I love the fact that like in this corner, I can wiggle it. That crack is filled in. You can tell I am going back a lot to hit that. Now, before I do anything else, I'm going to put the roller on these edges of the frame, and I'm also going to do a quick swipe down this, because otherwise I'm going to see those in my next layer of paint because of how fast this dries. When you're doing the center of the door, you don't want to do what you may have done in the past to let that brush get all dried out, because every place you've got these thin marks, every coat in the future is going to look different. It's going to look thin there, and you're going to wind up, instead of having 2 coats to cover this, you could wind up with 4 or 5 because you tried to stretch the paint. Didn't help you out, cost you a lot of time and effort. And this paint, put on heavy, goes a very long way, and you'll use less putting it on heavy than if you try to put thin coats thinking you're saving money. Your first rolls are just firm enough. You can see I'm turning it so I don't get that plastic up against where I've already rolled. And then I roll the way that I applied the paint. And I am barely hitting this with the brush. More paint will start showing on the roller. As I add more, but you can see that's not putting a bunch of paint on the roller. You absolutely do not want to apply the paint with this roller. All you're going to get is a bunch of bubbles that you cannot clear out and a bunch of texture. It is not meant to apply paint with. It is meant solely to do what I'm doing with it. Move out the brush strokes and smooth the surface. I prefer to roll as soon as I have done 2 sides of the frame. That works the best for me. So my first rolls are coming across it. And then just barely touching it to get any of the bubbles that I still see. Don't carry your brush across the center because you are liable to have drips that you will find later, and you don't want to go back and roll where you have already rolled. If you find one after it's dry, a simple solution is to use the flat side of a razor blade and lift it off. You can see that the coat of paint I have on here does not have a lot of thick and thin. When it's dry, it's going to be evident that it needs another coat of paint, but you're not seeing glaring areas on this where there's missing paint. And that's what you want your first coat of paint to look like. If you're painting a cabinet like laminate, you have to be really super light with your rolls because it's going to want to lift up. You also, on a laminate cabinet, will need to use a brush initially along all the cracks because it's going to want to pull out of those spaces. And a laminate cabinet would need to dry overnight before you put additional coats on. Once you have first coat on and a good grip, then you're fine to go ahead and just keep painting without that extra dry time. The edge of these rollers work really well if you've got a little tiny blob of paint into the corners. So now this one's ready to dry. And again, don't keep rolling. If you see spots out in the middle that you think, oh, I think there's bubbles there, don't do it. Leave it alone. Let the paint do its magic. Sometimes when you paint, you will miss a run, or you will find a spot that does what this did. It created a ridge here where there was a crack between this frame and this frame. So I'm going to show you how to carefully take off a run of paint that you didn't intend, or something that happens like this, because every coat of paint that I do over this, it's going to get worse. But if you use a safety razor blade, and just, this is wanting not to get in there. It's hard to keep it in the camera for you and get it to a good spot for me. Pull it through. And here, let's see if I can get it up a little bit farther. Right in here, if I was actually doing this for my kitchen cabinets, I would take the time right now to go back and sand this piece that is a loose pulled piece of wood and sand it really smooth. Since I'm just looking at primarily the finish differences and I'm not using this cabinet door on anything, I'm going to leave it, but that's something you need to look for too. Are there areas that need a little bit more attention before you put your second coat on? For some people, that's not going to matter, but it matters to me. And this has a little bit of a roughness here to it, so I'm going to grab sandpaper and knock that down. And yes, it's getting it back a little bit more to the previous finish, but I would rather do that and have this smooth. And I can probably get a little bit of this taken care of that I just showed you. Yep, that helped it. So this may be a part, this right here, I may or may not need to do a light third coat just over that. But still, it's a quick, fast fix to have a better looking finished door. I've let the doors dry for a little over an hour. I checked them a couple of times and there were places where it was not fully dry. And if you go back over partially dried of the Heirloom Traditions paint, you're guaranteed in those areas you're going to find texture. So it's better to let it dry a little bit further and wind up with a good finish. So this is the brush on. I wrapped the brush and the roller in foil. The True Applicator and the roller for HTP, I always wash between coats. I know there are people who don't, but I have found that every time I put it away, wrapped, and then use it, if it's it winds up creating texture or little pieces, little flecks of paint coming off into my surface, which I really do not want. So it's just simpler to wash those items and know that I'm going to have good luck with the finish. On this coat, I'm making sure that I'm getting down into that groove. I would strongly suggest, though people tell you to do it, do not caulk along that edge where that you see the cracks between this and the frame. Those are there on purpose. Those are expansion joints because your temperature and your humidity changes in your house with different times of the year, and that allows the door panel to move without cracking. And if you caulk it, eventually the caulk is going to crack, and it's going to be a much more visible crack than the paint, because this paint is flexible. That's one of the reasons it works indoors and outdoors so well on so many different surfaces, is it can flex and give with the temperature changes. You can see that even with the brush, I dip back into my paint more often than you would with traditional paints. And again, I'm going to check all the edges to make sure I don't have any runs. or any overage of paint, like right there, that was some. And to make sure I didn't miss anywhere. And this one, in the corner, a little bit, and all the corners are fine. So this one is ready to dry. Okay, this is the door that was rolled with the cabinet roller, and I'm going to do what I did before in the decorative edge. I'm going to use a brush because it's very hard to get into those spaces with a roller, the foam rollers. A nap roller, you can get in there, but boy, oh boy, are you going to see texture with a nap roller. And you're going to get flecks of that nap roller off into your cabinet. Or whatever it is that you're painting. Nap rollers are fine for walls, but they are not good for smooth surfaces. Wrap this back up. Set it aside and start rolling. Get those frame edges so they have the same finished look as the rest of the door. Final check of this edge, and there's a spot there. And this one's ready to dry. This is for the True Applicator, and I'm going to use an art brush to get all along this seam where the True Applicator has a little bit of trouble getting in there, or you put so much paint on the True Applicator that you wind up with pools or lots of bubbles that you struggle to get out. It's just easier to use the art brush. Go up those corners as well. Repeat the process with the True Applicator.
Very cool.
Jim, can you take this for me out of the way? Thank you. Jim says I missed a piece because I'm not around to this side to see it. Okay. You see anything else, Jim? I don't want it back. I want it out of the way. Thank you. I'll do the same thing as before. Get the middle of this up on the frame. This one's ready to dry. And this is the brush and roll. When you're painting additional coats, one of the mistakes people make is they want to put on a thinner coat than the initial first coat, and you're putting it on generously with every coat. Rolling across, brush strokes. Just firmly enough to get rid of those brush strokes, but not hard like you push a roller on a wall. And the last strokes coming up and down. We'll finish evening out the paint in the middle. And then stop rolling center and let the paint do its magic. Corners are fine. There's no runs. Oh, there's a drip. I went across the, oh, doggone it. That is not what I want to do. Avoid going across where you've already painted because drips happen. And this one's ready to let dry. All of the different applications to the doors, they've all dried overnight to give them the best time to level out to be fully what they're going to look like as a finished coat. From a distance, they all look good. But as you come in closer to it, you'll see a difference in the finishes. We're going to show it to you at 3 times magnification so that you can really see the close-ups that people have been asking for what the cabinets look like. This one is the brush only, regular brush painting this. The lights are going to have to go off for us to give you a good image of what this looks like as the actual finish to it. All of the doors are going to show grain because these are oak doors. But you can see the brush marks on here. And it's very hard to get rid of any of the little places that show in this. Now, this is what brushing looks like on a smooth surface. And you can tell I evenly applied the paint. I wasn't just doing a hodgepodge on this. But the more layers of paint you put on, the more those brush marks come out and show more. On the oak, it hides it some, but when you're looking at the door side by side with the other finishes we're going to look at, brush would not be your choice for what you use to apply this paint. This door is the one that was rolled with the firm foam roller, which is a cabinet roller. If you do a short nap roller, you're going to get a very different finish. And I'll show you quickly when we get the lights off. You'll be able to see on this. I'll show you what happens. What I have the light on right now was done on a smooth surface with a short nap roller. And all those little bumps that you can see on it, those are little flecks of fiber off of the roller. So every layer of paint going over that is going to get worse. This is with the, if I get back just a little bit more for you. It's hard. But this is with a foam roller on a smooth surface. It's definitely smoother. There's some little bubbles that dried, popped bubbles that dried, but not like the regular nap roller. This is just the rolled with a foam roller. It's a good surface. All of the grain lines, unless you fill that, are going to show up with any paint, any process. And you'll even see it when we get to the spray finish. Both the brushed one and the rolled one that I just showed you had areas that needed to have another coat of paint put on them. This is the finish with the True Applicator of what it looks like. And there are only 2 small spots on this that need touched up. Otherwise, it's fully coated with 2 coats of paint. And this is, like the other 2 we showed you, this is at 3 times magnification of a close-up of the finish of the cabinet doors. This is brush and roll, 2 coats, 3 times magnification. We're going to turn the light off so that you can see it better. This fully coated in 2 coats. There's no touch-up needed anywhere on this door. This door was sprayed. You saw how much paint was applied to it. When you see this here in person, all of these dark areas that you see in the grain lines, no paint got down into that grain. So this would need another coat sprayed onto it in addition to the amount of paint that's already been put on it. When we turn off the light, you'll see that there are the areas that don't have the grain, like right down here, that is an extra smooth finish. But if you look at just over the oak, let's see if I can pull this back up here. Look at the brush and roll, which is this top one here. Look at the spray. There is a difference, but it depends. What are you looking for? What are you wanting out of your finish? If you choose to spray, you need to follow whatever directions the sprayer is telling you to do. And you also need to think about the fact that you're going to have to prep your area. You noticed in the video when Jim was spraying this door, there was a lot of paint fog coming off. That's going to come off of any sprayer, so you have to be away from anything that you don't want those speckles of paint to land on, or you have to set up a tent system to keep it protected. You really don't want to spray outdoors because there is nothing more frustrating than finding bits of debris on your drying paint or gnats and insects that have gotten onto your paint, because when you pull that off, you damage the sprayed finish that you have put on there. There is no doubt that a sprayed finish on anything gives you a smoother finish, but for the time, effort, expense, is it worth it to you versus you saw how quickly brush and roll can be done on these doors. Many people leave their doors attached to their cabinets, so that's another step that is skipped with this product. It is totally a personal choice. Out of all the applications, for me, what I universally use on almost every project is brush and roll, because I get such a nice finish out of it. It's fast, it's easy, once you've mastered the technique. If you've not used the paint before, you need to work on the back of your doors first, because there is a learning curve to doing the brush and roll to get the finish that you saw on the door that I did. I don't know the difference in the durability when it's sprayed on, because anytime you add water to a paint, you are changing its chemical makeup. So that is not something I can speak to. The brush and roll or the True Applicator, I found the paint to be almost indestructible after the 30-day cure. It's a preference of your time, your energy, your expense. What do you want to do for the easiest method for you to transform your kitchen or whatever piece of furniture you're working on? The photos that you are looking at are of my kitchen cabinets. They have been painted for over 4.5 years, and this is how the finish looked today when I took the pictures. When people come into our kitchen, they are shocked to know that these were hand painted. They think they were sprayed. They will go up and touch them, rub them, look at them, and they're amazed at how smooth the finish is. Why I'm impressing this point is the other photos we have shown you and the ones that are coming after this are at 3 times magnification. When you start magnifying any finish, you start to see the irregularities that are in it. So this, when you walk into my kitchen, is what you visually see and how cabinets properly done with brush and roll look. This is cashmere on the left, Mediterranean Capri mix in the middle, and a factory spray finish on a cabinet. These were all taken in the same lighting, the same distance from the surface, and they are all 3 magnified 3 times. The dark mark that you see on the Mediterranean Capri is a shadow that I could not get off while I was trying to get where you could actually see what the finish looked like. You can see there is very little difference between the cashmere and Mediterranean finishes that were done with brush and roll and the factory spray finish. The factory spray finish is a little shinier because it was a higher gloss paint that was put onto the cabinets that we were photographing. There isn't a match that I could find for the luster of HTP's finish. So again, it's up to you what you want to do for finishing your cabinets. Also bear in mind, if you choose to spray, you are going to use more paint. Depending on the sprayer model that you use, it can be a significantly larger amount of paint. So the final decision is yours, but we have tried to give as fair a comparison between these methods as is possible. Thank you, and I hope this helps you.
Oh boy, here we go. Treat! Treat! Treat, treat! So close! Dang it! Come here, you little! I'm getting dizzy. Oh, crap! I'm sorry, Mom.